So this paper is part of a mixed methods research conducted in line with my dissertation under the PhD Development Studies program of UP Los Baños, Philippines. Transcending the pandemic becomes a critical priority for risk reduction, especially in highly vulnerable areas. The study focuses on the vulnerability of Davao City in the southern Philippines to flooding and how the current COVID-19 pandemic poses some challenges in the areas of risk reduction and management in this particular focus. The key areas of discussion shows how the current pandemic affects not only our daily lives, but the way how we deliver disaster response and manage risk communication concerns during these times. Specifically, focusing on the following concerns. First, communicating flood risk and disasters is an integral part of risk reduction, and risk messages is crucial for disaster preparedness. Second, management of risks highly depends on interoperability. Third, transcending the pandemic poses challenges in the management of risks and the inter-organization's coordination. And last, disaster risk reduction and management strategies can be further enhanced through proper knowledge transfer using effective risk communication. Disasters have been found to be directly linked with development, and its effects can seriously degrade the long-term potential for sustainable growth. The Philippines has ranked in 3 years straight from 2015 to 2018 in the Global Risk Index due to its almost 50% exposure to extreme natural disasters affecting 74% of our population in 80% of its land area. In the early 2020 alone, Taal volcano in Luzon has erupted prior to the pandemic, which led to the evacuation of people from their residences. Risk communication is commonly done by governments and institutions who disseminate information using different channels and tools. Communities need to build resilience by enhancing its capacity to respond to disasters, specifically during this time that flooding becomes secondary disaster to COVID-19 pandemic. This is one of the national policies under RA 10121 on disaster preparedness, which states that outcome 10 of this provision requires that there is a need to develop and implement comprehensive national, I'll just adjust. Develop and implement comprehensive national local preparedness and response policies, plans, and systems. Specifically, the aim for the continuity of operations of essential services plan, properly integrated and coordinated across its appropriate command systems. Mindanao area, for example, has experienced tropical storms and typhoons in the recent years. Just to mention Typhoon Bofa in 2012 and Tropical Storm Washi in 2011, which resulted to massive flooding, evicting thousands of people from their residences. This study was done as fieldwork during the pre-pandemic, and the study has been supplemented during this time using the incidences of flooding in the recent times and using secondary approaches. The challenges that DRRM, or the Disaster Risk and Reduction Management, is facing in the light of the new normal is the focus of this paper. It attempts to look at how flood vulnerable communities of Davao City can transcend the pandemic towards resilient recovery and manage collective action despite the constraints of the imposed health protocols because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The qualitative approach used in this study consisted of quotations from the narratives documented through the key informant interviews and focus group discussions using semi-structured interview guide. It is supplemented with secondary analysis of document reviews of policies, reports from the local dailies, and desk research from online sources. The study revealed that the current or the Philippines disaster risk and reduction management and communication flow follows a top-down approach. In accordance to the organizational setup of the National Disaster and Risk Management Policies, the community levels become the implementers and frontliners. This task during this pandemic becomes more challenging since it is basically the face-to-face and transactional mode of communication which is very particular and very familiar to the barangays or the communities. So this study basically tries to relate how this inter-organizational structure is being affected because of the pandemic. Incidentally, Davao City's DRRM framework capitalizes on the interdependent coordination and elements of the inter-organizational offices or agencies, highlighting the following areas. First, the DRRM is dictated by the National DRRM Plan. Second, communication strategies involves the variety of tools, including the face-to-face transaction, which is now being affected by the health protocols being imposed during this pandemic. And third, risk messages on disaster response and management relies on transactional and interpersonal processes, specifically in the community levels. The previously presented setup is now currently challenged by the constraints of this COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020 and early 2021, while the nation observes and monitors the increase of COVID-19 positives in Davao City, tropical depressions Ambo, Rolly, and Vicky have affected the Mindanao areas, including Davao City, which resulted to the evacuation of more than 1,000 individuals. The CDRRMO chief, in one of my telephone interviews with him, says that disaster response is now highly challenged and greatly affected by the health protocols, including the situations at the evacuation centers. Thus, achieving coordinated action among agencies through its interoperability mechanism, which has proven to be more effective through face-to-face transactions, need to be revisited and modified according to the needs of the new normal. Interoperability in the context of Davao City is operationalized with the city mayor being the overall disaster management manager and utilizes the Public Safety and Security Command Center as the central coordinating arm to facilitate response and manage flood risk among the vulnerable communities with the different agencies such as the Davao City Police Office, the City Traffic Management Office, the Central 911, the Disaster Risk and Reduction Management Office, and the Task Force Davao. These are the agencies which becomes very busy when there's a disaster in the Davao City area. In conclusion, building community resilience becomes more challenging during this COVID-19 pandemic, and it has affected the implementation of DRRM in Davao City, Philippines. This study revealed that the current system needs to be reevaluated and modifications have to be made to address the needs of the current times. As the pandemic continues to persist, Davao City moves forward to monitor and address the COVID-19 concerns. It also continues to explore ways and means to address disasters like earthquake and flooding among the most vulnerable communities and areas, with the major objective of transcending the pandemic towards community resilience and recovery. It is recommended that the following modified implementation be considered for a more effective and appropriate risk communication management, specifically craft a well-defined flood risk communication plan emphasizing the community-based approaches to DRRM, reactivate and create a clear organizational setup of the DRRM at the barangay levels, enhance the risk communication strategies to address the needs of the new normal, and lastly, develop context-specific flood risk communication messages for various target audiences using appropriate communication tools that would address the need of the pandemic. Finally, despite the pandemic, we all must have the positive attitude, the hopeful heart, and firm conviction that our resilience during these challenging times will help us move forward. Thank you and stay safe, everyone. Again, this is Professor Karen Joyce G. Cayamanda, an Associate Professor from the University of the Philippines, Mindanao, Davao City, Philippines. Good day and thank you for listening.